What if I told you there's a rhinoceros who believes he's a dog? Sounds impossible, doesn't it? But get ready, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about animal nature. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any incredible stories like this one. And leave a like if you love animals as much as I do. Picture the scene. A violent storm in the African savanna, lightning cutting through the dark sky, and in the midst of the chaos, a tiny calf fighting for its life. Wounded, abandoned, with no chance of survival. This is Ranger's story, but make no mistake, this isn't just another wildlife rescue story. What happened after Michael Thompson found that calf completely changed our understanding of the boundaries between instinct and learning, between nature and nurture. Because Ranger didn't grow up like a normal rhinoceros. He was raised by 3 German Shepherd dogs, and something extraordinary happened. Have you ever stopped to think if a wild animal can truly forget its nature? If one of Africa's most powerful giants can learn to behave like a domestic dog? Science said it was impossible. Experts guaranteed that wild instinct would always prevail. But Ranger was about to prove everyone wrong. In this video, you'll witness behaviors that have never been documented before. You'll discover how a rhinoceros learned to respond to commands, play like a dog, and create bonds so deep with his human family that he even challenged environmental authorities. But the most unbelievable part? What happened when they tried to return him to the wild? What Ranger did at that moment shocked biologists, veterinarians, and wildlife experts around the world. Stay until the end because I've saved the most surprising part for you. And don't forget to comment what you think of this incredible story. That night began like any other on the Thompson farm. Michael had finished his rounds of the property and was about to turn in when the sky began to change. Dark clouds accumulated on the horizon with frightening speed. The storm arrived with a fury I had never seen before. The wind howled through the trees, tearing off branches and raising dust. Lightning illuminated the entire savanna for fractions of seconds, turning night into day. And then the darkness returned, deeper than before. I was checking to make sure all the animals were safe when I heard something different. A weak sound, almost imperceptible among the noise of the storm. My 3 German Shepherds also heard it. Max, Luna, and Thor stopped suddenly, ears raised, focused on something beyond the gate. I grabbed my flashlight and went out into the rain. The water was falling so hard I could barely see 2 meters ahead. The dogs ran in front of me, barking urgently. They never did this without reason. Something was very wrong out there. That's when I saw the shape. Too small to be an adult but too large to ignore. It was lying in the mud, shaking violently. When the flashlight beam finally reached the creature, my heart almost stopped. It was a rhinoceros calf. He couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. His skin still had that pinkish tone of newborns. His eyes were closed, and he was breathing with difficulty. There were wounds on his legs and flank. Blood mixed with mud covered part of his small body. I looked around searching for the mother. Rhinoceroses are extremely protective mothers. They would never abandon their calves voluntarily. The fact that he was alone could only mean one thing. Poachers. The word appeared in my mind like a death sentence. In recent months, we had heard reports of illegal hunters in the region. They wanted the horns. Just the horns. The rest of the magnificent animal was left to rot under the African sun. And the calves? The calves were left orphaned, lost, condemned. I didn't think twice. I took off my jacket and wrapped the small trembling body. He was heavier than he seemed, but I still managed to carry him. The dogs ran at my side, protecting us from the rain as if they understood the urgency of the moment. When we arrived at the house, I called for Rebecca. My wife appeared at the door, still drying her hands. She's a veterinarian, and in the years we've lived together in Africa, she had already cared for hundreds of animals. But when she saw what I was carrying, her eyes widened. She didn't say a word. She just pointed to the room we had transformed into a makeshift clinic. I placed the calf on the padded table. Under the bright light, I could see how bad off he was. Hypothermia, dehydration, infected wounds. His chances of surviving were minimal. Rebecca worked in silence for hours. She cleaned the wounds, applied antibiotics, connected 4 fluids. I held the small body while she worked. He was so cold, so quiet, almost lifeless. Several times I thought we had lost him. The dogs didn't leave the room. Max, the oldest, lay down near the table. Luna and Thor stayed on the other side. They watched Rebecca's every movement with an attention that seemed almost human. From time to time, one of them would approach and gently sniff the calf. When Rebecca finally finished, she looked at me with that expression I knew well. It was the expression that said she had done everything she could, but that the rest no longer depended on her. It depended on this small, fragile creature's will to live. "We need to keep him warm," she said. Her voice was tired but determined. "If his body temperature doesn't rise in the next few hours, he won't make it." We brought blankets, a heating lamp, thermal packs. We set up a kind of nest next to the fireplace. That's when something incredible happened. Max got up and walked over to the calf. Carefully, he lay down beside him. His large, warm body wrapped around the small rhinoceros. Luna and Thor did the same, positioning themselves on the other sides. The 3 dogs formed a living barrier of warmth around the calf. Rebecca and I looked at each other. In all the years working with animals, we had never seen anything like this. The dogs knew. Somehow, they understood that this life depended on them. We spent the night keeping vigil. I dozed in the armchair. Rebecca checked vital signs every hour. The dogs didn't move. They remained there, guarding that small being as if he were one of their own. The storm continued outside, but inside that room, there was a strange peace. When the sun rose, something changed. The calf opened his eyes for the first time. They were dark eyes, deep, full of an innocence that broke my heart. He looked around, confused, trying to understand where he was. And then his eyes found Max. The dog was gently licking the calf's head. It was a maternal gesture, protective. The rhinoceros showed no fear. On the contrary, he pushed his snout against Max's chest, seeking warmth and comfort, and Max allowed it. He accepted that small orphan as if he were his own pup. Rebecca had tears in her eyes. "I think he's going to make it," she whispered. "Look at them. Look at how they've accepted him." I just nodded, unable to speak. There was something sacred in that moment, something that went beyond science or logic. We decided to call him Ranger. It seemed appropriate. He was a wild guardian who had found domestic guardians, a small warrior fighting for life against all odds. And at that moment, I promised myself that I would do everything to give him a chance. The first days were the hardest. Ranger needed to be fed every 2 hours with a special bottle. Rebecca prepared a nutritious formula that mimicked rhinoceros milk. I took turns with her on night feedings. There was always one of us awake, and there was always a dog beside him. The 3 naturally took turns, as if they had agreed among themselves. When Max needed to rest, Luna took over. When Luna went out to eat, Thor took her place. They never left Ranger alone. Not for a minute. As the days passed, Ranger began to gain strength. The wounds healed slowly. He began to nurse more vigorously. His eyes became more alert, and something remarkable began to happen. He began to imitate the dogs. When Max yawned, Ranger tried to make the same sound. When Luna stretched, he extended his short little legs. When Thor tilted his head to the side upon hearing a strange sound, Ranger made exactly the same movement. It was as if he believed he was one of them. Rebecca was fascinated watching. She took notes, recorded behaviors. As a veterinarian and biologist, she understood the rarity of what we were witnessing. Pups of any species learn through imitation, but they usually imitate their own species. Ranger didn't have that option. The only models he had were 3 German shepherds, and he adopted them as family without hesitation. To him, those dogs were his mother, his siblings, his pack. He didn't know he was different. He didn't understand that his thick skin and broad snout weren't like theirs. When he completed 1 month with us, Ranger was already walking around the house confidently. His paws, once weak and trembling, now supported him firmly. He followed the dogs everywhere. If they went to the yard, Ranger went after them. If they rested on the porch, he joined them. If this story is touching your heart as much as it touched mine, leave a comment telling me what you're feeling. And subscribe, because stories like this need to be shared with those who truly understand the value of a life. One morning, I woke up to a strange noise coming from the kitchen. When I went downstairs, I found a scene I'll never forget. Max was eating his kibble, and beside him, Ranger was trying to do the same. He stuck his snout in the dog's bowl and tried to chew the hard pellets. Obviously, he couldn't eat dog food. His digestive system wasn't prepared for that. But the intention was there. He wanted to eat what his brothers ate. He wanted to be exactly like them. I had to separate him gently and give him his special leaves and vegetables. Ranger looked at me with an expression that I swear was disappointment. Why couldn't I eat like Max? His eyes seemed to ask. I explained to him, even knowing he didn't understand my words. You're special, Ranger. You're different, and that's beautiful. But for Ranger, being different wasn't something he sought. He wanted to belong. He wanted to be accepted. And the dogs accepted him completely. To them, Ranger wasn't an orphaned rhinoceros. He was simply Ranger, part of the pack, part of the family. The months passed and Ranger grew at an impressive rate. What was once a calf the size of a large dog was now becoming a truly imposing animal. At 3 months, he already weighed over 200 pounds. But his personality remained the same. He still slept with the dogs. Well, he tried to. Now Max, Luna, and Thor had to squeeze around him, not the other way around. But they didn't seem to mind. Every night, the same scene repeated. Ranger would lie down in the center, and the 3 dogs would snuggle around him. Rebecca and I began to wonder what would happen when he got too big, when he weighed a ton or more, when his horn grew and he developed the natural strength of an adult rhinoceros. How would this work? Would he be dangerous? But for now, these concerns seemed distant. The Ranger we knew was gentle, playful, and incredibly social. He learned to respond when we called his name. He came running when we whistled. He sat when we asked, although his sitting was more like an awkward squat. One day, I decided to test how far this connection went. I grabbed a ball, the same one I used to play with the dogs. I threw it far and shouted, "Fetch!" Max, Luna, and Thor ran off, and Ranger went with them. His heavy paws made the ground shake, but he ran with determination. Max got there first and grabbed the ball, but instead of bringing it back, he stopped and waited. Ranger approached, curious. Max dropped the ball in front of him. Ranger sniffed it, touched it with his snout. Then, incredibly, he pushed it back in my direction. My heart almost exploded with emotion. He was playing fetch. A rhinoceros was playing fetch like a dog. Rebecca filmed everything. We needed proof because no one would believe this. I myself barely believed it, and I was living it. The canine behaviors multiplied every day. Ranger began to wag his small tail when he saw us arrive. He tilted his head to the side when we spoke to him. He even tried to bark, producing a hoarse, funny sound that was his version of a dog's bark. But there were moments when his true nature appeared. Moments when rhinoceros instinct superseded learned behavior. When something scared him, he didn't run. He stood still, assessing the threat. When he felt challenged, he lowered his head in a natural defensive posture. These moments reminded me that, however socialized he was, Ranger was still a wild animal. Powerful animal. An animal that nature had designed to be a living tank of the savanna. And that worried me, because I knew that eventually we would have to face a difficult reality. We couldn't keep him forever. The law was clear regarding wild animals on private properties. Even with Rebecca being a licensed veterinarian, even with our farm having all the conditions, there were rules, protocols, and the rule for rescued animals was always the same: rehabilitation and reintroduction. But how do you reintroduce a rhinoceros who thinks he's a dog? How do you return to nature an animal who has learned to trust humans? Who plays fetch? Who sleeps cuddling with dogs? These questions kept me awake at night. Rebecca shared my concerns. She knew better than anyone how traumatic it would be for Ranger to simply be dropped in the wild. He didn't have the survival skills his mother should have taught him. He didn't know the dangers. He didn't know how to defend himself properly. We decided to procrastinate the inevitable. Every day with Ranger was precious. Every moment observing his unique relationship with the dogs was a gift. So we continued our routine, feeding him, caring for him, recording his unusual behaviors, living one day at a time. When Ranger turned 6 months old, he was already bigger than all 3 dogs combined. His horn was beginning to grow, still small but clearly visible. His skin had thickened, gaining that characteristic rhinoceros texture. He was no longer a calf. He was a young rhinoceros, but his personality hadn't changed. He still sought Max for comfort. He still played wrestle with Thor, although now we had to intervene because he didn't know his own strength. He still followed Luna around the farm like a pup would follow its mother. And then came the day I dreaded. An official truck stopped at the entrance to our property. 2 men got out, uniformed, with clipboards in their hands. They were from the wildlife department. Someone had reported that we were keeping a rhinoceros on the property. We didn't try to hide. There was no way to hide a nearly 600-pound animal. I took the officers to the yard where Ranger was resting under a tree. The 3 dogs were around him. When we got close, Ranger lifted his head and came toward us. The officers took a step back instinctively, but Ranger just came to smell my hands, looking for the treat I always carried. I gave him a piece of carrot. He chewed contentedly, his tail swaying slightly. One of the officers took several photos. We spent hours talking. I explained how we found Ranger. I showed Rebecca's veterinary records, the videos from the first days when he was fighting for life, the unusual behaviors he had developed. Everything. I put all the cards on the table. The officers were professional, but I could see they were impressed. One of them, the older one, admitted he had never seen anything like it. But rules were rules. Ranger would need to be relocated to a suitable reserve. We had 30 days to prepare. Those were the 30 hardest days of my life. Every morning I woke up knowing I was closer to losing Ranger. Every night I watched him sleep with the dogs and my heart broke a little more. How do you explain to an animal that his family is about to disappear? Rebecca tried to stay strong, but I saw her crying and hiding. She had become attached to Ranger as much as I had. Maybe even more. She had brought him back from death. She had spent nights awake caring for him. Now she would have to hand him over to an uncertain fate. We tried to prepare Ranger the best way possible. We began taking him to wilder areas of the property. We introduced vegetation he would find in the reserve. We tried to teach him to be more independent, but it was like trying to teach a fish to forget water. The dogs sensed something was wrong. Max became more protective. Luna wouldn't leave Ranger's side. Thor, normally the most playful, was quieter. Animals have a perception that goes beyond what we can understand. They knew a goodbye was approaching. On the night before the transfer, I couldn't sleep. I stayed on the porch watching Ranger sleep with the dogs for the last time. The full moon illuminated the scene. 4 shapes lying together. 3 dogs and a rhinoceros. An unlikely family. A true family. When the first rays of sun appeared, the officers were already there. They brought a complete team. Veterinarians, handlers, a special truck adapted for transporting large animals. All very professional. All very cold. Putting Ranger in the truck was one of the hardest things I've ever done. He didn't understand why he was being separated from the dogs. He resisted, not with aggression, but with confusion. I could see in his eyes. Why? Why are you doing this? Where are my brothers? Max, Luna, and Thor barked desperately. They tried to follow the truck. I had to hold them back. They didn't understand. How could they? To them, we were abandoning a pack member. We were betraying trust. And maybe we were. I know this part hurts. It hurts me too, every time I remember. But stay with me because this story isn't over yet. And what happens next will show that true love overcomes any distance. If you're feeling what I'm feeling, tell me in the comments. And subscribe because you're part of this journey too. Every person who hears this story keeps Ranger's message alive. The reserve where Ranger was taken was about 30 miles from our farm. It was a large area, well protected, with several other rhinoceroses. The ideal place, according to experts. He would have space to roam. He would have his own species around him. He could live as a rhinoceros should live. But I couldn't stop thinking, what if he didn't want to live as a rhinoceros should live? What if all he wanted was to be with his family? With the only brothers he knew? These questions tormented me day and night. In the first weeks, the officers sent us reports. Ranger was adapting. He was eating well. He showed no aggression. But he also didn't interact with the other rhinoceroses. He stayed alone, on the edge of the reserve closest to our direction, as if waiting for something. The dogs also changed. Max stopped eating with the same appetite. Luna spent hours lying in the place where Ranger used to sleep. Thor didn't play anymore. The house was silent in a way that suffocated me. We were all in mourning. Mourning for someone who was still alive. 1 month after the transfer, I received a phone call. It was the head of the reserve. There was a problem with Ranger. My heart raced. Is he hurt? Is he sick? No, the man replied. He's escaping. Escaping to where? I asked, but deep down I already knew the answer. To your farm. He's trying to return to you. This rhinoceros has crossed 30 miles of wild territory 3 times already. He's crossed rivers, passed through areas with predators, overcome fences. And every time he appears near your property. We've been tracking him with the chip. I was silent for a long moment. Ranger was coming home. He didn't accept the separation. He didn't understand why he had been taken away. And he was doing the impossible to return. A rhinoceros with dog behavior was using his strength and determination to return to the pack. The officers were clear. They couldn't continue chasing and recapturing Ranger indefinitely. Each operation was expensive and stressful for the animal. We needed to find a permanent solution. And they had a proposal. A special license to keep Ranger with us. It would be unprecedented. No such license had been granted before. But Ranger's case was exceptional. His behavior was unique. And it became clear that trying to forcefully reintegrate him into wildlife was crueler than keeping him in a controlled familiar environment. We accepted immediately, but there were strict conditions. Our property would need improvements. Higher and more resistant fences. A specific and ample area for Ranger. Regular inspections. Detailed behavior records. And most importantly, Ranger couldn't reproduce. We couldn't create more rhinoceroses with atypical behavior. We agreed to everything. We started the construction immediately. Meanwhile, Ranger was being brought back. This time not in a closed truck, but accompanied by a team that guided him gently, letting him make the way, just supervising. When the gate opened and Ranger entered the property, the dogs went crazy. They ran toward him, barking, jumping, spinning. Ranger quickened his pace. His enormous body crossed the yard in seconds. And then the most emotional reunion I've ever witnessed happened. Max jumped, placing his front paws on Ranger's shoulder. Luna spun around him non-stop. Thor barked so loud it seemed his lungs would explode. And Ranger? Ranger made his special horse sound, that attempt at barking. He swung his head from side to side, touching each dog with his snout. Rebecca and I cried openly. The officers accompanying Ranger took photos and filmed everything. One of them said he had worked with animals for 20 years and had never seen anything like this. The connection was real, undeniable. It transcended species and instincts. Ranger was home, and this time it would be forever. The following months were of adjustment. The new area built for Ranger was perfect. Spacious with shade, a small pond for him to cool off. But he rarely stayed there alone. The dogs visited him constantly. And when we opened the gate connecting his area to the rest of the farm, Ranger returned to the old routine. He circulated around the property. He rested under his favorite trees. He came to the house at mealtimes. He waited for his treats. He watched Rebecca work in the clinic. He accompanied me on night rounds. It was as if he had never left. But something had changed. Ranger was bigger, stronger. His horn had grown considerably. He was indisputably an adult rhinoceros now. And with that came greater responsibility. We needed to ensure that his socialized behavior didn't become a problem. Rebecca implemented a continuous training program. We reinforced basic commands. We established clear boundaries. We taught Ranger to respond to specific signals and sounds. It wasn't training in the traditional sense. It was more like establishing a common language, a form of communication between species. And it worked. Ranger learned that there were times for play and times for calm. He understood that certain areas were off-limits. He respected the boundaries we established. His intelligence was impressive, far beyond what traditional science attributed to rhinoceroses. News about Ranger began to spread, first locally, then nationally. Journalists appeared wanting to film. Researchers asked to study him. Universities contacted us offering collaborations. Ranger was becoming famous. Initially, we rejected all requests. We wanted to protect Ranger from excessive exposure. But Rebecca had an idea. What if we used this attention for something positive? For education? For awareness about the situation of rhinoceroses in nature? We agreed to participate in a documentary. The production was careful, respectful. They filmed Ranger in his daily routine. They showed his relationship with the dogs. They interviewed Rebecca about the scientific aspects of the case. They interviewed me about the rescue and emotional connection. When the documentary aired, the response was overwhelming. Millions of people watched. Comments came from all over the world. People crying, moved by the story. Teachers using the case to teach about animal empathy. Scientists debating the behavioral implications. But the most important thing was the impact on awareness about illegal hunting. Ranger's story put a face, a personality, on what before was just a statistic. People understood that every rhinoceros killed leaves orphaned calves behind. That every life lost is a tragedy. Conservation organizations contacted us. They wanted to use Ranger's image in campaigns. They wanted him to be an ambassador for the cause. Rebecca and I discussed at length. We didn't want to exploit Ranger, but we also saw the potential to save others from the same fate. We established strict rules. Any use of Ranger's image would need our approval. Funds raised would go directly to combating illegal hunting and habitat protection. Ranger wouldn't be a cute mascot. He would be a symbol of resistance and survival. A university proposed a longitudinal study. They wanted to document Ranger's behavior for years. Understand how a wild animal raised by another species develops. Which behaviors are innate and which are learned. It was a unique opportunity in the history of biology. We agreed, but with conditions. The study couldn't interfere with Ranger's routine. There would be no invasive procedures. There would be no unnecessary stress. Researchers would come to us, not the other way around. And any sign of Ranger's discomfort would mean immediate pause in observations. The team that arrived was composed of 3 main researchers. Dr. Sarah Chun, animal behavior specialist. Dr. James Okonkwo, evolutionary biologist. And Dr. Maria Santos, comparative psychologist. They set up discrete equipment around the property. Cameras that Ranger didn't even notice. The first weeks were of pure observation. They just watched, took notes, recorded everything. And the more they observed, the more fascinated they became. Because Ranger wasn't simply a rhinoceros living with dogs. He had developed a unique hybrid social system. He maintained hierarchy with the dogs. Max was still respected as pack leader. When Max barked in a certain way, Ranger stopped what he was doing and paid attention. This interspecies leadership dynamic was something science had never adequately documented. But Ranger also maintained instinctive rhinoceros behaviors. His territoriality, for example. He marked specific areas of the farm as his. When unfamiliar animals approached the perimeter, Ranger assumed a defensive posture. His wild side never completely disappeared. It just coexisted with the learned. Dr. Chun was particularly interested in play. She spent hours analyzing how Ranger and the dogs interacted during leisure moments. What she discovered was revolutionary. Ranger had learned to modulate his strength based on the play partner. With Thor, the most robust of the dogs, Ranger played more intensely. Stronger pushes, faster runs. With Luna, smaller and more delicate, he was incredibly gentle. Slow movements, soft touches. This social awareness and ability to adjust contradicted everything we knew about rhinoceroses. Dr. Okonkwo focused on the evolutionary aspect. How could an animal genetically programmed for certain behaviors develop completely different ones? The answer, he proposed, lay in neuroplasticity. Ranger's brain had adapted to the social environment it found. Pups of any species are born with brains ready to learn. But what they learn depends on the environment. Ranger was born with rhinoceros instincts, but his young brain absorbed canine social patterns. Two different programs coexisting in the same nervous system. Dr. Santos explored the emotional dimension. She wanted to know if Ranger experienced emotions comparable to dogs. Attachment, loyalty, joy, sadness. Through behavioral and hormonal analyses, she discovered that yes. Ranger produced oxytocin, the bonding hormone, when interacting with the dogs. The levels were comparable to those found in dogs interacting with their human families. This meant that Ranger's bond with Max, Luna, and Thor wasn't just behavioral. It was biochemical, emotional, real in all senses measurable by science. The preliminary results of the study were presented at an international conference. The room was packed. Researchers from dozens of countries came to hear about Ranger. When the images were shown, there was absolute silence. And then, applause. Long applause. But not everyone was convinced. Some scientists argued that we were anthropomorphizing behaviors, that we saw connection where there was only basic conditioning, that Ranger didn't love the dogs, he just associated them with food and safety. Rebecca calmly responded to each criticism. She presented data, charts, statistical analyses. She showed that Ranger sought the dogs even when all his basic needs were satisfied, that he demonstrated separation anxiety when removed from them, that his behavior couldn't be explained solely by conditioned reinforcement. The discussion that followed lasted hours. It was heated, passionate, but respectful. And in the end, even the most fervent skeptics had to admit, Ranger represented something new, a phenomenon that challenged established categories, a bridge between what we thought was possible and what truly is. Back at the farm, life continued. For Ranger, all that scientific attention was irrelevant. He didn't know he was rewriting textbooks. He didn't understand that his case was changing how we think about animal intelligence and behavioral plasticity. All he knew was that he was home, with his family, living each day as it came, playing with his four-legged brothers, receiving affection from Rebecca and me, eating his favorite leaves, taking mud baths in the pond, simply being Ranger. One afternoon, while watching Ranger sleep under the acacia with the 3 dogs around him, I realized something profound. We spend so much time trying to categorize and understand, study and analyze, but the truth was simple and at the same time infinitely complex. Love has no species boundaries. Family isn't determined only by genetics. Belonging is something we create, not something we find ready-made. Ranger wasn't a rhinoceros trying to be a dog. He was simply Ranger, unique, complete, perfect as he was. The years passed. Ranger grew to his full size, almost 2 tons of pure muscle and bone. His horn impressive and majestic, his presence imposing. But to us, he remained the same calf we found that stormy night. Max aged gracefully. His fur turned gray, his movements slower. But he never lost his position as leader, and Ranger never challenged that. Until the end, Max was the alpha. And Ranger, despite being 100 times bigger, respected that absolutely. When Max got sick, we all felt it. He was almost 13 years old, a respectable age for a German Shepherd. Rebecca did everything she could, but we knew the time was coming. We prepared Max's final days with all the love he deserved. Ranger seemed to understand. He stayed close to Max constantly. He lay down beside him with extreme care. He didn't play roughly anymore. He just remained there, a silent and protective presence, guarding the one who had always guarded him. On the night Max passed, Ranger didn't leave his body. He touched Max gently with his snout, as if trying to wake him. Luna and Thor cried, that high-pitched sound dogs make when they lose a companion. and Ranger made his hoarse sound, a lament in his own way. We buried Max under the tree where he liked to rest. Ranger watched the entire process, and for days afterward he returned to that place. He stood there just observing. Grief. Ranger was grieving. Anyone who looked would recognize that. Life on the farm changed without Max. Luna assumed the role of leader, although in a different way. More gentle, less authoritarian. Thor matured, became more responsible. And Ranger adapted to the new dynamic. Because that's what we do when we lose someone. We adapt. We continue. We honor the memory by moving forward. New dogs joined the family over the years. Pups that Luna had. And each of them grew up knowing Ranger. To them, a giant rhinoceros being part of the pack was completely normal. It was all they knew. And Ranger accepted them, one by one. With the same patience Max had shown him years ago. The cycle was completing. The saved pup was now the guardian. The protected was now the protector. Life has a way of creating perfect circles. Visits continued over the years. Schools brought children to see Ranger. Always supervised, always controlled. But seeing children's eyes light up when they saw a rhinoceros playing with dogs was magical. It was hope. It was possibility. A small girl once asked me, "Why doesn't Ranger live with other rhinoceroses? Doesn't he get sad?" I knelt to be at her height and answered, "Ranger lives with his family. And family is who loves us, not who looks like us." She thought for a moment and then smiled. "I understand. Like me and my adopted brother. We don't look the same, but we're real brothers." "Exactly," I said. And in that moment I understood the true gift Ranger had given us. A living lesson about love and acceptance. Rebecca published several articles over the years, all based on Ranger, each one adding a piece to the scientific puzzle he represented. Her work won awards, international recognition, but she always said Ranger was the real scientist. He made the discoveries. She just documented them. The impact on conservation was measurable. Donations for rhinoceros protection increased significantly after the documentary. New laws against illegal hunting were passed, partially motivated by the attention Ranger's case generated. Lives were saved because one life was saved. Activists used Ranger's image in campaigns. Always with our permission, always with respect. He became a symbol of resilience, of hope, that even amid tragedy and loss, something beautiful and transformative can emerge. Politicians visited the farm. Some genuinely interested, others just wanting a photo. We learned to distinguish. We learned to protect Ranger from exploitation while allowing his story to make a difference. It was a delicate but necessary balance. An international conservation organization offered us a significant amount to take Ranger on a world tour. Exhibit him in zoos and reserves. He would be comfortable, they guaranteed. He would have the best care. And we would reach millions of people. We refused without hesitation. Ranger wasn't an attraction. He wasn't a product. He was a family member. And family isn't sold, isn't rented, isn't exploited. No matter how much good it could do, some things are too sacred. That decision was difficult but necessary. And if you understand why we did it, if you feel in your heart that some things are priceless, then leave your comment. Tell me what this story means to you, because every word from you makes me believe that there are still people who understand the value of a true connection. Subscribe and be part of this community that chooses love above all. Over time, the attention diminished. What was news became known. The extraordinary became part of our normality. And honestly, it was a relief. We could go back to just being a family. An unusual family, but a family. Ranger was 10 years old now, in the prime of life for a rhinoceros. Majestic, healthy, happy. His routine was predictable and comfortable. Mornings patrolling the territory, afternoons at the pond, evenings with the dogs. A good life, a full life. But I knew this wouldn't last forever. Rhinoceroses can live 40 years or more. But dogs have such short lives. Luna was already showing signs of age. Thor had developed arthritis. The years passed too quickly for them. The idea of Ranger losing more members of his pack broke my heart. but I also knew it was inevitable. It's part of the bargain we make when we love. The eventual pain of loss in exchange for the present joy of connection. One night, sitting on the porch with Rebecca, I expressed this concern. How would Ranger deal with more losses? How would we ensure he didn't end up alone? Rebecca held my hand and said something I never forgot. Ranger taught us that family isn't permanent. Family is what we build moment by moment. Max left, but Luna was there. When Luna leaves, there will be others. Ranger understands this better than we do. He lives in the present. He loves completely whoever is here now. She was right. I was the one stuck in future anxiety. Ranger simply lived, loved, existed fully in each moment. There was wisdom in that, a lesson I was still learning. The researchers continued visiting occasionally, updating data, checking how Ranger was developing, and each visit confirmed the same thing. Ranger was exceptionally healthy, both physically and psychologically. His hybrid behavior wasn't a source of stress. It was his normal. Dr. Chun published a book about the case. She called it Beyond Boundaries, the rhinoceros who rewrote the rules. It became a bestseller, used in university courses around the world. Ranger was literally in biology books, rewriting what we thought was possible. One of the most interesting things in the book was the analysis of brain plasticity. Dr. Chun argued that all animals have more capacity for adaptation than we recognize. Ranger wasn't an anomaly. He was a window into hidden potentials. If a rhinoceros can learn canine social behaviors, she wrote, what else is possible? How many animal capacities remain dormant simply because they never encounter the right environment to manifest? Ranger wasn't special. Ranger was lucky. Lucky to find someone who saw his potential. This perspective changed how I saw not only Ranger, but all animals. Every creature carries invisible possibilities, unrealized potentials, and our responsibility isn't just to protect. It's to allow flourishing, to create environments where the extraordinary can emerge. Visitors frequently asked if I would do it all again, if I could go back to that stormy night, knowing everything that would come after. The challenges, the legal complications, the public scrutiny, the constant responsibility. Would I make the same choice? My answer was always the same, without hesitation. Every challenge was worth it. Every complication was an opportunity for growth. And the responsibility is a privilege. Ranger didn't just change what I know about animals. He changed who I am as a person. Rebecca agreed. Her career had taken directions she never imagined. She became a reference in unconventional animal behavior. Universities invited her to lecture. Her work with Ranger opened doors to help other animals with special needs. But more than career or recognition, there was daily satisfaction. Seeing Ranger running through the field, hearing him make his hoarse sound of happiness, observing the harmony between him and the dogs. That was priceless. That was life lived with purpose. One autumn morning, I woke up early. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. I went to check on the animals and found a scene that perfectly captured our journey. Ranger was lying in the pasture. Luna on one side, Thor on the other. Two of the younger puppies slept practically underneath him. The morning mist created an ethereal atmosphere. The soft dawn light painted everything in golden tones. And there, in that perfect moment, was my family. Unlikely, impossible according to the old rules, but real, tangible, beautiful in its uniqueness. I took a mental picture, because cameras capture images but not emotions. They don't capture the tightness in the chest in the face of so much love. They don't capture the deep gratitude for witnessing something so rare. Some moments live only in memory and in the heart. Ranger opened one eye and saw me. He didn't move so as not to wake the others. He just looked at me, and in that look was everything. Trust, affection, recognition. He knew who I was. He knew what I meant, and I knew what he meant. Family. Ranger's years with us taught more than animal behavior. They taught about prejudice, about how our expectations limit possibilities, about how the boxes we create to understand the world often prevent us from seeing its true nature. Before Ranger, I would have said with confidence that rhinoceroses are solitary animals, territorial, guided purely by instinct. Now I know that description is incomplete. Rhinoceroses can be those things, but they can also be more. It depends on context, upbringing, opportunities. The same goes for all species, including ours. How many human capacities remain dormant because they never find the right conditions? How many potentials do we waste because we cling to limited definitions of who we should be? Ranger was free to be who he was. We didn't force him to act like a rhinoceros or like a dog. We allowed him to find his own way, and he created something new, something unique, an identity that was authentically his. Shouldn't that be the ideal for everyone? These reflections accompanied me as life continued its rhythm. Seasons changed. Years passed. Ranger matured, but never lost his essence. That scared calf in the storm still lived inside the gentle giant he had become. We celebrated his 15th birthday with a party. It might seem silly to celebrate a rhinoceros's birthday, but for us it was important. Milestones matter. Recognizing shared time matters. We made a special cake of fruits and vegetables. The dogs got their own smaller cakes. Ranger devoured his slice with enthusiasm. He got it all over himself. He looked like a clumsy calf again. We laughed until we cried. These moments of pure joy were everything. They were why every challenge was worth it. Every sleepless night, every worry. The community around us embraced Ranger completely. Local children grew up knowing his story. To them, a rhinoceros being part of a family wasn't strange. It was inspiring. It was proof that differences don't need to separate. Teachers used Ranger as an example in lessons about empathy and acceptance. He appeared in local children's books. Drawings of Ranger decorated school walls. He became part of the region's cultural identity, a symbol that our small corner of the world was special. Tourists began to include our region in itineraries specifically to have a chance to see Ranger. We didn't allow unsupervised visits, but we organized controlled monthly encounters. The local economic impact was significant. Ranger not only changed hearts, but also helped economically. This created a virtuous circle. The community protected Ranger because he was important to them, and this protection guaranteed his well-being. We didn't depend only on distant authorities. We had close allies who saw value in conservation because they saw value in Ranger. It was a lesson about conservation that I applied in consulting with other organizations. Protection works best when communities have direct interest, not through exploitation but through genuine connection. When people love a specific animal, they protect the entire species. An incident tested this community protection. Rumors arrived that illegal hunters might be in the region. The threat wasn't specifically against Ranger, but rhinoceroses in general. Still, our property could be a target. The community's response was immediate. Neighbors organized voluntary vigils. Local police increased patrols. Even the children participated appropriately, making awareness posters. Ranger wasn't alone. He had thousands of guardians. The hunters never appeared. Maybe they never existed. Maybe they were just rumors. Or maybe, upon learning of the level of protection, they chose easier targets. Whatever the case, the episode showed that Ranger was truly safe. Not just by fences and laws, but by collective love. This security allowed me to breathe more easily. My greatest fear had always been something happening to Ranger. Not from natural causes, which are part of life, but from human violence, from greed, from indifference. Knowing that so many shared my dedication to protecting him was comforting. Luna passed when Ranger was 17. She simply slept and didn't wake up. Peaceful death at 15 years old. A long and good life for a dog. Ranger stayed beside her for hours. When he finally accepted she was gone, he did something remarkable. He gently covered her with dry leaves, one by one, pushing them with his snout over Luna's body. It was funerary behavior, something rhinoceroses don't do naturally, something he perhaps observed in human burials over the years, or maybe simply something his heart told him to do. We buried Luna beside Max. Ranger watched again. And again, he returned to that place in the following days. But this time, something different happened. One of the younger puppies, called Scout, began to accompany Ranger on these visits. Scout would lie down beside Ranger while he stayed in silence near the graves. He didn't do anything special. He was just present. And I realized the cycle continued. Ranger had learned about companionship from Max. Now he was teaching Scout. Knowledge passing through generations and species. Thor lived 2 more years after Luna. When he passed, Ranger already had Scout and 2 other young dogs by his side. The transition was smoother. Still painful, but softened by the presence of new life. The pack was renewing itself. Ranger remained as the constant. At 20 years old, Ranger was in the full maturity of a rhinoceros. His strength was impressive but controlled. His horn, magnificent. His presence, majestic. But his essence remained the same. Gentle, loyal, an inseparable part of his canine family. Scientific studies about him continued, now under a new generation of researchers. Dr. Chan had retired, but her successor, Dr. Amara, maintained the commitment to document Ranger with the same respect and care. What fascinated Dr. Amara was the consistency. After 20 years, Ranger maintained behaviors learned in infancy. He still tried his horse bark. He still responded to commands. He still played with dogs in ways no wild rhinoceros would. This challenged theories about instinct overriding learning in maturity. With age, it was expected that Ranger would regress to more typical behaviors of his species. But no, his established patterns were permanent, a fundamental part of who he was. One afternoon, while Dr. Amara observed Ranger interacting with Scout, she asked me an interesting question. If you could ask Ranger one question and he could answer, what would you ask? I thought for a long moment. Are you happy? That would be my question. Because deep down, that was what mattered. Not the scientific articles or the impact on conservation. Not the fame or uniqueness. But whether that magnificent being we saved 2 decades ago found happiness in this life we built together. Dr. Amara smiled. Based on all behavioral and physiological markers, she said, the answer would be yes. Ranger exhibits all the signs of deep psychological well-being. He's not just alive. He's living fully. Her words filled me with a gratitude I could barely contain. Because that was the only validation I truly needed. Not from other humans, but from Ranger himself. Knowing he thrived, that he was happy, made everything meaningful. Rebecca also aged gracefully. Her silver hair shone in the sun. Her hands, once firm and quick, now moved more slowly. But her love for animals only grew. Every wrinkle on her face told a story of a life dedicated to caring. She still worked at the clinic, but at a reduced pace. Ranger received her veterinary care more than any other animal. Not because he needed it, he was exceptionally healthy, but because the regular exams were their time together. Rebecca checking vitals, Ranger patiently accepting her touches. I also felt the weight of the years. My back complained. My knees hurt after long walks. But I still did the night rounds with Ranger. This was our tradition, our sacred time. I wouldn't give that up for anything. Walking beside Ranger under the starry savanna sky had a meditative quality. His heavy steps marking rhythm. My smaller steps trying to keep up. The comfortable silence between us. We didn't need words. The company was enough. One night, we stopped on a hill that overlooked the entire property. The full moon illuminated everything with surreal clarity. Ranger stood motionless at my side, just observing. And I thought about everything this animal had meant. He changed laws, influenced research, inspired millions, saved countless rhinoceroses through the awareness he generated. But to me, he was simply Ranger. The calf I found in the storm. The family member, the friend. Success isn't measured in global impact, I realized. It's measured in moments. In this moment, standing under the moon with a rhinoceros at my side. In mornings watching him play with the dogs. In nights knowing everyone we loved was safe. That was true success. When he turned 25, we organized another celebration. Smaller, more intimate than the one at 15. Just close family and some special friends. Ranger got his favorite fruitcake. Scout and the other dogs got theirs. I looked around at the gathered faces. Some of the children who visited Ranger years ago now brought their own children. The cycle of generations witnessing this living story. And in these children's eyes, I saw the same wonder their parents had felt. A small boy asked me, "Will Ranger live forever?" The question had the cruel innocence of childhood. "Nothing lives forever," I answered gently. "But stories live, and the love we share lives. Ranger will live in every person he touched." The boy seemed satisfied with that. He ran close to Ranger, carefully touched his leg. Ranger lowered his head, letting the boy stroke his snout. Infinite patience. As always, Ranger instinctively understood how to be gentle with the little ones. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Hot summers, mild winters, rains that filled the pond, droughts that partially emptied it. Through it all, Ranger was there, constant as the stars, firm as the mountains on the horizon. He began to slow down at 30. Nothing dramatic, just slightly slower steps. More time resting in the shade. Fewer sudden runs through the field. Age arriving gently, as it should arrive for all who lived well. Rebecca monitored his health with redoubled attention. Every exam was thorough. She adjusted diet as necessary. She added supplements. She ensured he had everything to age with dignity and comfort. It was the least we could do. Scout, now a veteran dog of 12 years, remained Ranger's constant companion. The two had developed a special bond. Scout understood when Ranger needed space, when he needed company, when he just wanted silence. Deep friendship transcends words. A new generation of dogs arrived. Grandchildren of Luna's puppies. They grew up hearing stories of Ranger, seeing him as a natural part of the pack. To them, there was nothing unusual about having a rhinoceros as a family member. It was simply how things were. And Ranger accepted them with the same patience he always demonstrated. He let the puppies play around him. He tolerated their mischief. He taught boundaries gently. He became the patriarch not only by age, but by the wisdom he emanated. At 35, Ranger was one of the oldest rhinoceroses in the region. Many who were born at the same time had already passed. But he continued, strong, present, a living testament that love and care can extend life beyond expectations. Visitors now came to see him specifically for his age. He was a living legend, the rhinoceros who lived 3.5 decades with a family of dogs, the animal who rewrote scientific books, the symbol that impossible is just a word. But to me, he was simply my old friend. I looked in his eyes and still saw the scared calf. I saw every shared year, every overcome challenge, every experienced joy, an entire life in a look. Rebecca and I were also old, our hair completely white, our movements slow, but our dedication remained unwavering. As long as we had strength, we would care for Ranger. We would honor the commitment made that stormy night decades ago. We hired additional help. Young people passionate about animals who considered it a privilege to work with Ranger. They brought energy our tired bodies no longer had. But we maintained loving supervision. No one knew Ranger like we did. One morning, during rounds, I found Ranger lying in an unusual position. My heart accelerated. I called Rebecca urgently. She came running, bringing equipment. We examined Ranger carefully while Scout watched anxiously. Just arthritis, Rebecca finally concluded. Worse than yesterday, but manageable. She increased pain medication. She adjusted cushions in his rest area. She ensured he had maximum possible comfort. Ranger accepted everything patiently, trusting us completely. That was the first of several scares. Each one reminded me of life's fragility. Each one filled me with gratitude for one more day. Because that's all we have. Individual days. And every day with Ranger was a precious gift. He still had good moments. Days when he seemed younger. Days when he played with the young dogs. Days when his spirit shone through the aged body. On those days I saw clearly, essence never ages. Only the packaging changes. Scout also began showing signs of age. He and Ranger were aging together. Two old friends walking slowly through the field, unhurried, just enjoying the sun, feeling the breeze, existing side by side. There was melancholic beauty in that. One afternoon, sitting on the porch watching the two, Rebecca joined me. She held my hand without saying anything. She didn't need to. I knew what she was thinking, because I was thinking the same. The time was coming. For Scout. For Ranger. For all of us. And all we could do was appreciate the now. I know talking about the end hurts, but it's part of the story. Part of life. And if you've come this far, if you feel this story like I feel it, then leave your comment telling me what's going through your heart. And subscribe because you understand that the best stories are the real ones, even when they hurt. Share with those who need to know that true love is worth every moment, even the last ones. Scout passed first. At 14 during sleep. Once again, Ranger remained beside the body. Once again, he performed his ritual of covering with leaves. Once again, he demonstrated understanding of loss that shouldn't be possible but was. Scout's burial was especially difficult. He had been a bridge between generations. Between the past with Max and Luna and the present with the young dogs. Losing him was losing a living connection to shared history. Ranger seemed to understand this better than any human. In the following days, Ranger spent unusual time at the graves. Max, Luna, Thor, Scout. For dogs who were his family. For friends who passed. He stayed there, silent, just present with memories. And I wondered what went through his mind. What does a rhinoceros think about death and loss? The young dogs tried to cheer him up. They brought toys. They invited him to games. But Ranger needed his time to grieve. Eventually, he emerged. Slower, quieter, but still present. Still engaged. Still choosing to live fully each remaining day. At 40, Ranger was a phenomenon. Rhinoceroses rarely pass 40 in nature. Even in captivity, few reach this mark. But Ranger continued. Testament to the power of love, care, and life lived without the stress of wild survival. The scientific community wanted to study his longevity. Understand contributing factors. Diet, exercise, low stress, constant companionship? Probably a combination of everything. But I believed there was something more. Purpose. Ranger had purpose. He was loved, cared for, important to many. Maybe at some deep level he knew this. And maybe that gave him reason to continue. To wake up every morning. To take one more step. I can't prove it scientifically, but my heart knew it was true. Rebecca celebrated her 80th birthday. Our entire life now intertwined with Rangers. More than 4 decades since that stormy night. More than half our lives shared with this extraordinary being. How do you thank sufficiently for that? She gave a small speech during the party. Ranger taught me, she said, that we're capable of much more love than we think. That boundaries are illusions. That family is choice, not obligation. If I could leave a legacy, it would simply be this. Love without limits. Everyone applauded. Ranger was there, of course. He was always at our celebrations. He was part of everything. And hearing the noise, he made his horse sound. His version of participating. His way of saying he also celebrated. He celebrated this unlikely family that became everything. My own 80th birthday came a few months later. Smaller party, more intimate. But Ranger equally present. I sat near him, leaning against his enormous flank, as I had done hundreds of times over the years, feeling his warmth, his solidity, his comforting presence. If someone told me a rhinoceros would be my best friend, I would never believe it. But here we were, 2 old companions, sharing comfortable silence. We didn't need anything more. We had each other. We had memories. We had now. Ranger's final years were gentle, without unnecessary suffering. Rebecca ensured that. Her veterinary experience meant he had the best possible palliative care. When there was pain, there was medication. When there was discomfort, there were adjustments. Dignity was priority. He still interacted with the dogs, although less energetically. He still made his rounds, although at shorter distances. He still came when we called, although more slowly. The essence remained. The body just cooperated less. It's the nature of age. One night, at 42, Ranger simply lay down and didn't get up anymore. It wasn't sudden. He slowed down throughout the day. He ate less. He drank less. And when night fell, he chose his favorite spot under the acacia and lay down. We stayed with him, Rebecca and I on one side, the dogs on the other. We formed a circle around him, as he had been wrapped that first night as a calf. Now, on this last night, he was again surrounded by love. Cycle completing. His breathing became slower, more spaced, but there was no suffering. There was peace, acceptance. He looked at each of us, and in his eyes I saw gratitude, recognition, farewell. He knew, and he was ready. Rebecca held my hand. Tears silently streamed down our faces. The dogs cried that high-pitched sound of lament. The moon was full, illuminating the scene with soft light. And when Ranger took his last breath, it was as if the entire world paused. We remained there all night. We couldn't leave him. Not yet. We needed this time to absorb reality, to begin the process of acceptance, to honor a life that changed so many other lives, including ours. When the sun rose, we began preparations. We decided to bury him there under the acacia, where he had chosen to depart, beside the dogs' graves, united in death as they were in life, family forever. The community came to help, neighbors who loved Ranger, children now adults who grew up knowing his story, researchers who dedicated careers to studying him. Everyone wanted to participate in this final farewell. We dug deep. We worked with care and reverence. And when we lowered Ranger's enormous body into the earth, every person there felt the weight of loss. Not just of an animal, but of a symbol, of a teacher, of living evidence that miracles happen. We covered the grave with rich earth. We planted native flowers around. We placed a stone with simple inscription, Ranger Bridge Between Worlds 1985 to 2027. Didn't need more words. Those who knew understood. Those who didn't, the story would tell. The following days were the hardest of my life. The farm seemed empty without Ranger, even with all the animals still present. His absence was palpable, physical, painful. I expected to see him at every corner, hear his sounds, feel the ground shake with his steps. Rebecca dealt with grief through work. She compiled all the research, all the notes, decades of observations. She transformed it into a comprehensive book. Ranger, A Life Beyond Boundaries. It would be published posthumously, but she needed to complete it. It was her way of honoring him. I dealt by walking, the same routes I did with Ranger. Alone now except for the dogs, but walking because stopping meant completely accepting he was gone. And I wasn't ready. I don't know if I ever would be. The dogs also grieved. They returned to the grave daily. They lay there for hours. One by one, eventually they understood. And their behaviors changed. Less joyful, quieter, collective mourning, family processing loss together. Messages arrived from all over the world when news of Ranger's death spread. Thousands of people sharing how his story touched them, how it changed perspectives, how it inspired careers in conservation, how it simply made them believe in goodness. Reading these messages brought comfort, knowing Ranger impacted so many, that his life had meaning beyond what we could measure, that he would continue to live in stories, in lessons, in touched hearts. Death isn't the end when legacy remains. A foundation was created in his memory. Ranger Foundation for Interspecies Understanding, focused on research about unconventional animal behavior and on educational programs about empathy. Part of Rebecca's book royalties went to it. Ranger would continue making a difference. Schools incorporated his story into curricula, not just in biology but in classes about empathy, acceptance, overcoming prejudices. Ranger became a pedagogical tool, a way to teach children that differences should be celebrated, not feared. Universities named programs in his honor. The Ranger Initiative for Animal Cognition Studies, the Ranger Center for Conservation Psychology. His name became synonymous with breaking barriers, with challenging assumptions. with proving that impossible is temporary. 1 year after his death, we organized a public memorial. Hundreds attended. Some traveled from other continents, all wanting to celebrate a life that touched them somehow. It was beautifully painful. Celebration mixed with longing. Dr. Amara presented final research. 42 years of data, showing behavioral consistency throughout Ranger's entire life, proving definitively that behaviors learned in infancy can persist forever when rooted deeply enough. Rebecca presented the book's conclusions. She spoke with a trembling but firm voice. Ranger taught us, she concluded, that nature isn't a prison, that we can honor instincts while developing potentials, that who we are is as much about where we're going as where we came from. My own speech was simpler, more personal. I spoke not as a scientist or conservationist, but as a man who loved a rhinoceros, as a father of an impossible son, as guardian of a miracle. Ranger saved my life as much as I saved his, I admitted. He taught me about unconditional love, about accepting differences, about true family. He was my teacher on 4 legs, my 2-ton friend, my greatest adventure. I ended by saying I'm grateful. Grateful for the storm that brought us together. Grateful for every difficult day. Grateful for every simple joy. Grateful for having been chosen for this journey. Because it was an honor, privilege, a gift. People cried openly. They hugged each other. They shared their own stories of how Ranger touched them. And I realized he had created community. A global network of people connected by believing that love overcomes all differences. Visitors continue coming to the grave. They leave flowers, small notes, children's drawings. The place has become an informal sanctuary, a pilgrimage site for those who need to believe miracles exist, that kindness matters, that one life can change the world. Rebecca and I aged more rapidly after losing Ranger, as if part of us had departed with him. But we continue, caring for the dogs, maintaining the farm, sharing the story, honoring the memory the best way we knew. At 85, I still walk to the grave daily. I sit there. I talk to Ranger as if he could still hear. Maybe he can. Maybe energy, consciousness, love, persist beyond physical death. I choose to believe so. I tell him about the dogs, about new research inspired by him, about children who send drawings, about conservation laws passed in his honor. I tell how he's still changing the world, still maturing, still present. And sometimes, when the wind passes through the acacia leaves in a certain way, I swear I hear his hoarse sound, that impossible rhinoceros bark. And I smile through tears, because I know he's at peace. I know he knew he was loved, and that's all that matters. Ranger's legacy is measured not in years lived or documented behaviors. It's measured in lives touched, hearts opened, minds changed. Every person who knew his story carries a piece of him forward. And so, he never truly dies. He lives in every researcher who chooses a career in animal behavior because of him. In every child who learns about empathy through his story. In every rhinoceros saved because someone cared after knowing Ranger. He lives in every family that adopts a different animal. In every person who overcomes prejudice. In every moment someone chooses love over fear. Ranger multiplied in thousands of small actions. Millions of kind choices. This was the journey of a lifetime. Of several lifetimes. Rebecca and I were blessed to witness it. To participate in it. To have our existences intertwined with this extraordinary being who transcended all expectations. If there's a lesson in all this, it's simple. Love knows no boundaries. Family is created, not just born. And when we open our hearts to impossible possibilities, the universe conspires to make them real. Ranger began as an orphaned calf in a storm. He ended as a global legend. But in the middle, in the space between dramatic beginning and celebrated end, he was simply Ranger. Living, loving, being. And that's all any of us can aspire to. To live authentically, to love completely, to be exactly who we are, without excuses or limitations. Ranger did that. And in doing so, he gave permission for others to do the same. When my own time comes, I want to be buried there. Under the acacia, near Ranger and the dogs. Rebecca wants the same. It's not morbid. It's recognition of where we belong. With our family. Forever. This is Ranger's story. But it's also our story. Of all who believe that impossible is just a word. That differences enrich instead of divide. That true love doesn't see species, only hearts. This story is my truth. Every word. Every emotion. If it touched you the same way living it transformed me, then share it. Tell someone who needs to know that miracles exist. Subscribe and be part of this family that chooses to believe that love overcomes everything. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not how long we live, but how much love we share. Ranger taught that better than any teacher. And wherever you are, friend, thank you for everything.